thank you very much for filling us in on Scotland. I was fascinated by the idea of the elders walking into somebody's house to see if they're observing the Sabbath. Well, in Ireland, the observing of the Sabbath wasn't a big issue, but dancing in Lent was, and people observed. The priest went around observing the ditches and beating people out of them, courting couples and such like. So probably sex was worse than the Sabbath, I think, in a sense. Having said that, though, I feel very strongly that what we must get rid of in both countries is the idea of the churches being policemen of people's lives. I don't think that was so much the case in Anglicanism and in Britain generally. I don't get in England. I don't get that feel about it so much. I think in Anglicanism people were treated a bit more as adults, and they were a congregation of adults. Whereas I think in Catholicism in Ireland, and possibly in England, but certainly in the Presbyterianism in Scotland, what you described is really being a policeman. And I think that is what absolutely turned people off religion, i.e. in this country Catholicism, a lot, is the policing of people's lives from all kinds of things in the bedroom and such like. And I think if the leaders concentrated on loving one's neighbour and what that really means, I think we would have a revolution led by Pope Francis, which is what he's trying to do, I think.
Thank you for that. I agree with you to quite a considerable extent about Anglicanism having a different flavour than the other two religions, but I think that you have to place this firmly in the English milieu. Sorry, I might. You have to place this firmly in the English milieu. I think England was a far more pluralist country. There were different power centres. It was a free country. Ireland wasn't. Scotland was a poor country where basically to survive authoritarianism was the normal way that power was exercised. So the particular heavy-handed, intrusive form of religion isn't altogether surprising in Scotland and Ireland, perhaps for different reasons. I mean, my hunch about what has happened in Ireland, that the decline in the standing of the church, Catholic Church here, is perhaps less to do with the way that clerics exercise their authority. It's due to the pace of social change. I mean, in the Netherlands, I suspect that Catholic clergy were less overbearing than some of their counterparts in Ireland, but the church has fallen away in influence even far more completely than it has done in Ireland, and I think this is due to a sort of wholly reconfiguration of society that people with a Christian perspective have really not been able to respond to in any kind of organised or effective manner.
Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you for speaking tonight. I was struck by what you said about the media framing part of Scotland's current state, and I was thinking that we're kind of moving towards a very similar state in Ireland. For example, the media have already framed the upcoming referendum on same-sex marriage in a year or two's time. So I was wondering, was there anything in Scotland that that didn't happen with the media that could still happen in Ireland to protect, say, the media in Ireland from a similar situation as happening in Scotland?
Well, I mean, my feeling is that the media here, the different forms of media, are more susceptible to a kind of Christian perspective on the question of same-sex marriage than they were in Scotland. I mean, the media in Scotland is in decline. It is very much directed by a small number of people. They are looking for niche readership, niche viewers, and they have identified people with a kind of liberal left cosmopolitan perspective as being their loyal, faithful. I'm hoping that is not the case with the media. Oh, it is the case. Well, I'm hoping that is not absolutely the case with the media in Ireland, and that it needs to be more diverse. I think that the institution of same-sex marriage is a backward step. It's very harmful for a lot of reasons. I know that a lot of gay people in Scotland are very troubled by it, that the equality group, that Stonewall, they don't represent many people beyond their own sort of mobilised people, within the elite in London and a few other centres. And I think those Christians who see same-sex marriage as really going backwards a considerable way would be well advised to reach out and find that, build up a coalition among different sectors who feel that it's really not appropriate.
Is there any way of having an intellectual response within academia to a secularist ideology? Because it seems to me that ideas matter, and there aren't enough ideas coming from the other side.
By the other side, you're referring to those who call the shots in academia at the moment?
I'm referring to... Sorry. I don't think that Christians have actually come up with an intellectual position that they can use to argue against secularism. They argue for their rights, but not for the values they espouse.
Yeah, I think that's a wise observation that you make, and to me it's surprising, that there haven't been more effective critiques of what I think is a shallow and shaky secularist order. Some of these critiques in England have been made by agnostics and atheists, who just see through the superficiality of what is being put down as the new set of norms. Unfortunately, outside a few centres, academia in Britain is not in the best of shapes, and too many students, especially in the humanities and social sciences, are basically required to regurgitate, what are the new orthodoxies for managing a society, rather than appraise them in any kind of critical or sceptical fashion. I find it very hard to know how that can change in academia unless economic factors prompt a lot of young people to reject it as a rite of passage towards adulthood and a career. I think there is far more that can be done in the media and in the wider society through agitating, through mobilising, through critiquing the shortcomings of what is the new orthodoxy.
I think we'll just have time for probably about 2 more questions. So maybe one from the back and one up here then.
I was just wondering if in Scotland the church has been slightly undermined by O'Brien's failures, and so its voice is not being probably heard as much as it should. But have you got the equivalent of an Iona Institute or a Catholic comment to fill that gap? Because it seems to me that in this era, it's the laity that have to really come to the fore, because the church has lost its authority through the abuse, all that problems that they've had,
I think one of the... Actually, I suspect that the Catholic Church in Scotland was not harmed by the O'Brien saga as much as many people may have thought a year or so ago. The problems I think one of the big problems the Catholic Church faces in Scotland is that it operates within silos. You have the educational arm of the church, you have the religious orders, you have the bishops. There is no head of the Catholic Church in Scotland. O'Brien was not, he was the Archbishop of Edinburgh, he wasn't the head of the church. And there is very little sort of sharing of information, discussing of strategy in order to, put forward a church perspective on various public issues, in which there is something to be said. I think there is a realisation that even though the Catholic population of Scotland increased by 80,000, mainly due to so many Poles arriving in the country, there is a realisation that the church is going to shrink. Parishes will be reduced in the major urban centres, and perhaps if there is less of an emphasis in keeping a large sort of infrastructure together, the question of fighting back in intellectual terms, in terms of, dare I say it, propaganda, will be given the attention it deserves.
Okay, there's a woman here in the second row. I will head first, and then there's one in the second row here. Here.
Professor, Professor, you began by presenting aggressive secularism as a movement that tries to push religion and the church out of the public square. Surely it is more than that, and there's another side to it. Surely what is happening today is also withdrawal of church and religion from the public square. Very literally. Take here in Dublin, a few decades ago, I remember, in May, there was in every parish in Dublin a thing called a May procession, with stack of the Blessed Virgin, with songs and with flowers. A lovely thing. You can't find that today. That was not secularists did that. That was the church did that.
I think it's sad what you've said. Actually, in Scotland, the church is now more visible. I think there were never that many parades because of the danger of collision with militant Protestants when the country was badly divided along sectarian lines. But now Christians are in the centre of city, coming out and affirming their faith, particularly over issues like abortion. But I agree with the important point you're making that.
Are there public processions of a Catholic name?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, well, not here. We're back in penal times here.
But they're a new development here in Scotland.
Do you watch the woman here? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Anne McKenna. I'm a fellow Scot who has spent most of my life in Ireland, and I would like to ask your opinion of the fact that part of the secularist, atheist argument is that religion has been a very divisive factor in society, nowhere more so as in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. And in a sense, these two are mirror images of each other, one being planters foisted on a Catholic country, the other being poor Irish immigrants foisted on a Catholic country, both coming from very strict backgrounds. Now, the question I would ask is, as someone who would like to be a propagandist for my faith, how does one counter, particularly in Scotland, the argument that religion, through the ages, through the world, has been a divisive factor in the stabilisation and prosperity and happiness of society? Secondly, could I add a secondary and perhaps more optimistic comment? I'm reading your book, Divided Scotland, which is a most delightful and deeply compassionate, concerned, as well as professionally historical book. It occurred to me that I inferred from your book that you were on balance against a yes vote in the referendum, upcoming referendum in September. And I just wondered, speculated, perhaps romanticised, that would it be at all likely that when Scotland separated from England, that historical memories of its independent past, when it was both Catholic, as all its rulers were Catholic, and also a kith and kin to the west, to Ulster, the Dalriada in the west of Scotland. And in fact, Robert the Bruce, as you know, the great icon of Scottish independence, had regarded them as a kingdom at one point. As a historian, you would know that. And is there any possibility that these stirrings, which Alex Salmond and others might resurrect, could change the pessimistic view for the Catholics in an independent Scotland?
Well, so much to get one's teeth into there. Thank you very much for your very nice remarks about my book. I don't know if you're hanging around afterwards for a cup of tea or coffee, but I'd be certainly willing to chat to you about where Scotland is going. I mean, your first question puts me on the spot somewhat, but I would say that the impetus for the durability of sectarianism in Scotland, and perhaps to some extent also in Ulster, was less due to religion, especially the nearer we get to the present day, than it was to a range of other factors, territorial issues, economic issues, and that the number of religious people who were deepening social divisions was not that vast. I mean, the number of Presbyterian ministers who, in the rather fraught interwar period in Scotland, who stuck their necks out and said, you know, this is disgraceful, this is just a mockery of Christ's message of forgiveness and tolerance, what was more than the number of Paisley-type firebrands. And we've had low-level sectarianism continuing despite the fact that for the last half-century the churches have combined on so many fronts. So I mean, during the third of the century that the Northern Ireland conflict raged, I think the religious input into that conflict was there, but it was increasingly peripheral rather than central, and it was other factors which haven't disappeared despite the peace process, which kept the momentum going. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Just one last question from the man in the third row there.
Thank you for an excellent presentation, Professor. I was about to ask a question which you partially answered. I've been in Scotland several times in recent years, and I've been greatly encouraged by the level of involvement I've seen between different denominations, particularly in the Outer Hebrides in Lewis, which is predominantly we church, as it were, Presbyterian, but there's tremendous collaboration happening between the Presbyterians, between the Anglicans, and between the Catholics. And I was about to ask if there are signs or growing signs on the mainland of Scotland, as it were, that would reflect that. And I just wanted to comment on one of the other questions, the question about the Irish intelligentsia, the Catholic or Christian intelligentsia. The reality is that most most Irish intellectuals would have been educated in what are really have been formerly secular institutions. We have no Catholic university in the country, and even what denominational colleges we have are about to be destroyed. By 2016, Church of Ireland College of Education will no longer exist as a denominational college. St. Patrick's College, Drumcondra, will no longer exist as a Catholic college with a Catholic ethos, and Mater Dei, second level Catholic college, will no longer exist. These three colleges will be incorporated as a secular institute of education into Dublin City University. So the destruction of the Catholic influence at third level is proceeding apace, and it has always been very slight insofar as we don't have a Catholic intelligentsia in the way that we have in many other countries. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that observation. The big struggle in Scotland is to keep the faith schools going, which are predominantly Catholic. There are a number of Jewish and Muslim schools, but they are predominantly Catholic. And I think they will continue. One of the reasons is that a lot of new Scots, people who came to Scotland mainly for economic reasons, are attracted to those schools because they offer a very good grounding for children, giving them good moral ethos, and so they have a lot of defenders, more perhaps than in times past.
Okay.
There's one more, I don't know.
One more, okay. One more.
I'm part of the Catholic Church here in Ireland. I think one of the problems we have here is with a lot of the clergy also. They're afraid to speak up. We have 3 papers, 3 Catholic papers, and we deliver them to churches. And if somebody objects to some article in a particular paper, which I would speak is the Iona paper, which speaks the truth, that priest will take that paper out of that church. And that is a problem that we have.
I'm not sure, obviously not being familiar with, these particular issues, but I mean, this is inevitable. It's inevitable through the history of Christianity that, different voices that may be meaningful will nevertheless be felt to be inconvenient in one place or another, but you have to keep going.